And we are live on today's gamification revolution. I'm Ivan Kuo, and I am a managing editor of Gamification.co. And I am here today with a lovely guest by the name of Bill Hanifin. Bill Hanifin, how are you?
Ivan, how are you?
I'm
Great
fantastic.
to be here.
Yeah. So today I am filling out for Gabe. Most of you have seen me before on this show. Gabe is unfortunately on a plane somewhere high in the sky, so he cannot be here today. But I'm excited to be here with Bill. He is going to be a speaker, an expert on facets of marketing and loyalty and gamification. And he's going to be this year at G Summit 2014. Now, for all of you who are interested in coming, I have a code down here at the bottom, GAMREV, in which you can use to save $200. So, it's in everyone's best interest to take a look at this code, come to the website, and see Bill and myself live at G Summit. All right, so let's get into the meat of it. So Bill, loyalty, marketing, and gamification, what's your background and how did you land in this sort of sector of marketing and gamification?
Ivan, I took a circuitous route to get into the loyalty business.
Hmm.
You think about loyalty marketing as part of the direct marketing business, some derivative of that. And I actually had a background in finance and banking.
Right.
And at one point in time, I was working with Visa, and we were managing a software product that was helping banks in Latin America, in this case, manage co-branded card programs with rewards. So I found myself in an unlikely spot of traveling Latin America and helping banks get their credit card rewards programs up and running on this software. And so I really didn't know much about loyalty except for that. So my first impression was this: spend money on the card, get points, you redeem the points for a prize, gift card, cash, travel, something like that. And in the middle of that project, we had Shell Oil call us out of the blue and say, we're launching something that we're calling a coalition program in Peru. And do you think your software could help us? So long story, we ended up winning that business. We became part of the launch team to launch what's now called Bonus Peru. It was launched in 1998, and it's still there, successfully working in the market today. And it opened my eyes that that loyalty was really about the consumer. It wasn't about spending on a card. And of course, we've grown a lot from there. But that was my beginnings into the business. That's how I got introduced.
Yes, I want to touch on that. So your beginnings are rooted in, I think, what most people perceive to be traditional loyalty. What were some of the aha moments
Yeah.
that led you to believe in just the consumer itself and led you to come up with solutions that go beyond just points on the card? What have you worked with that goes beyond that?
Well, I have to tell you, I'll tell you a story since Gabe's not here. But the way I met Gabe originally was we were each requested to participate in a day-long loyalty workshop with a national restaurant chain.
Mhm.
And we did this a couple of years ago. And it was Gabe and myself, and then a professor from a local university who had done a lot of research into loyalty marketing and customer retention and things like that. And we were kidding around and we said, boy, we've got the old school guy, that was me. We've got the new school guy, that was Gabe. And then we've got the professor somewhere in the middle to sort of moderate things. And the funny thing was that we dress differently and we use different terms to describe the business, and maybe we have different experiences, Gabe and I, but we connected immediately, and there was a bridge there. And the reason there was a bridge is that years ago, we had worked with a lot of big brands to launch loyalty programs, and they're all in the traditional sectors you're thinking about, like airline, hotel, big retail, multi-line department store, and the models were all very much the same. And so I actually got into the business when we were still trying to explain to people what loyalty was all about, trying to convince CMOs and their teams that this is something that was financially accountable, and if they invested in it, they'd get a good result. And so we went really quickly through this cycle of education to suddenly something that was table stakes. And so once it became table stakes, you saw just programs everywhere, many of them looking very much alike. And then you started to see customers falling off a little bit. Their interest was waning a little bit. And customers, consumers, people like yourself, myself, everybody listening today, we look at these programs and say, well, I'll sign up, I'll take it. If I can go to a store and end up collecting a bunch of points and get a $10 gift card, why shouldn't I do that? But it really wasn't changing behavior. And that was one of the first aha moments for me.
Of course, of course. And I think what's interesting is like obviously that educational period in which you're explaining what loyalty is something a lot of gamification practitioners also go through. It's just explaining what the system truly is about. And I think where we
Right.
both lie, and I think this goes into a little bit of your talk that you want to share at G Summit, is this idea of context, right? And so rooting all of your sort of
Yeah.
systems and engagement in the context of the individual. So, I'm interested in knowing, what to you, at least from a loyalty perspective, what does context mean? And and how do we get that for the people we're trying to engage?
What context means to me is that we have to remember that our customers that we like to talk about as target audiences and targeted segments and things like that, high value segments and customers. We use all these marketing words around that,
Mhm.
and sometimes it allows us to forget that they're human beings. And that was another aha moment. Is I had had a lot of experience talking to a couple of the gamification enablers, Badgeville, Bunchball, that group. I got to know Gabe a little bit, and we saw that loyalty marketing in the traditional sense desperately needed a transformation, needed to just come forward an evolution or two. So one of the revelations, I said, how are we going to make this happen? And it was to realize, well, people are human. And so what does that mean is that I have some intrinsic motivations that aren't always tapped by the traditional model. And so gamification, of course, speaks to those intrinsic motivations, getting people to maybe change behavior in a brand's favor based on recognition, on status, on belonging in a community, on achievement, on competition, all those sort of things. And that was an area that, even though I have to be fair and say that the loyalty kind of godfathers that were out there talked about always having a balanced blend of reward and recognition, but they really only meant it in terms of we've got to give people points, and then we also have to maybe let them have a couple of opportunities to go to the front of the line, or to get a special privilege, or to get a more boutique experience in a call center. It really wasn't about tapping into the intrinsic motivation side of people. So contextual loyalty, when we first started to talk about that, it was really about thinking about your customers as humans and starting to create a value proposition that was much more thinking about how can we reach inside somebody's intrinsic motivation, tap into their heart, tap into their emotions, and actually have some fun with it. Get them to participate with the brand because they're having fun and they think it's pretty cool to hang out with this brand, whether it's online or in the store.
Yeah, and just personally as a consumer, which we all are, I love it when I see a directed effort from a brand attempting to connect with me as an individual, which I love. Just I think sort of campaigns like Chipotle's little Farm Fresh campaign that they did recently, things of that nature to connect with individuals are things that I really vibe with. But there's an interesting dichotomy there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because although we want to connect with individuals as people, everything is still a very data-driven approach, right? We need to be able to gauge engagement and sort of this intrinsic value of the things we're trying to preach here. But, you know, is there such a thing as being too data-driven in which we lose that the context of being human? What if everything that we rely on, for example, like big data, if we rely too heavily on that, is there any risk of just losing the human nature of just relying on this data too much?
I think it's interesting. So you touch on a number of things. If I think of maybe the resurgence of these surprise and delight programs that are out, and I think about Panera Bread as a great example. Traditional loyalty strategists, some people that I grew up with in the business, would have dismissed the idea that someone like Panera Bread could have a successful customer marketing program based around surprise and delight. They would say, no, you have to have an explicitly awarded currency, and you can do the surprise and delight as a little add-on, as a tactic. And Panera has had a great success with their program. And that, just because what the consumer sees from the program, and I experienced it yesterday. I stopped at a Panera Bread, had lunch, got a surprise dollar off and a free drink, and I thought, oh yeah, I didn't even know I had that on my account, but it was a nice thing. But all of that, it doesn't deny the fact that there's a lot of quantitative work going on behind the scenes. So I think the interesting thing about it is what the consumer sees is fun, surprise, something I'm not expecting. It almost seems like a game a little bit. The more I come, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing, but I know I'm getting rewards, and it makes me more inclined to come here instead of choosing another place for lunch. But what's happening behind the scenes is, you still have a room full of people that are statistical analysts that are crunching data, trying to understand what the right reward is for the right person, and trying to award properly based on people's value and frequency and other measures that they might put in place. So to this date, the brands that I've seen that are being really smart about it are still using data. They've got tight financial models. They really have a sharp eye on the fundamentals. But then the way they're articulating the program and the value to the consumer, it can seem game-like fun, surprise, and delight. It works.
I see, I see. And yeah, Panera Bread is a pretty oftenly cited example we hear in this space, at least with the guests we talk about here at GCO and G Summit. People seem to really enjoy the randomness, at least from our community, but then some of our experts also sort of dismiss the idea of randomness too. And it's interesting because you sort of see that as a positive thing as well. So I love to get your idea on some of the other techniques you've seen in which people are sort of raising the bar. How can organizations increase engagement with their consumers just with loyalty and other techniques such as Panera's random coupon strategy?
Well, it's interesting because the toughest thing to do is to talk about loyalty because as soon as you speak the L word and you think about it in large L, capital L terms, people immediately go to thinking about points and mile programs and that traditional structure. And I've read so much, and I think we can all relate to this, that you can do a tremendous job with data. You can create value propositions that will trigger behavioral change in a consumer group, and it'll work very well. The company will make money, but it's still there's still some areas where sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But there, when you think about how these programs are put together, it's more a matter of mixing, I guess, the art and the science. And that's kind of where I was going for a minute. Is that you build around the science underneath, but you have to put the art out in front. And I think not enough companies have done it. And I know where I was headed with the loyalty idea is that loyalty puts us in a box. And I think more and more people are realizing that loyalty, if you think about true loyalty, it's probably created on a holistic basis. So the ecosystem, the customer experience, the after sales support, there are all sorts of things that contribute to true customer loyalty, meaning no matter what happens, Ivan is going to go back to a certain retailer to buy a type of clothes or something online. And you'll suffer through some disappointments and some late shipments and different things like that because you've got that loyalty built up. I don't think you're ever going to achieve loyalty in that sense by awarding points or some explicit currency. And so I think that's what we have to do in a way is when you say how can we create customer engagement and how can we create change in our business, I'm really looking at this as, and I started using the term a few years ago, is that every custom company out there has a customer group, they've got lots of data, and they've always got a business challenge. And I think knowing those things, we can be smart advisors to those businesses and create data-driven customer marketing solutions. So we call that a customer strategy, and we feel like every company needs to have a customer strategy that's well-defined, well-executed, and nurtured and maintained. But that doesn't mean that every company needs a loyalty program. Right. And that's really the big difference today. So something like Panera Bread could fall into the loyalty program category, but it's really not that, is it? It's almost the data-driven customer marketing solution that comes outspoken to the customer in a different way.
And when we're thinking about the holistic nature of loyalty and how that's sort of automatically driven by just the people themselves, is that something you can aim for in a loyalty program? Because it's interesting to think about small restaurants around New York City who have these undying, just loyal fans who just will always go there regardless of the presence of a loyalty program. Is that something you can really strive for in the system?
I think you can use a marketing program to support that good feeling. So probably the kind of situation you're describing happens from probably the way Starbucks originally created their brand. People just love it, like the product, like the vibe, like the store, like the whole process of, instead of getting coffee and running, and it's not even an experience, it's actually an experience when you go into a Starbucks and have a drink made. So whether you're a Starbucks fan or not, you've got to admit it's a different way. They introduce people to a different way to consume a hot beverage like that in the morning. And so I think it's that creates the foundation of loyalty, but there does come a certain point in time where any of these brands would have to say, we've accomplished this, maybe the hardest thing to do, but how are we going to defend our turf? And how are we going to leverage the data that we've been collecting? And maybe most importantly, how are we going to get customers to talk to us a little bit more? Because right now, all they're doing is just exchanging money for the product, and that's it. So we've worked with a lot of companies in the past that when you wrote down a little grid of what are the top 3 reasons that you're interested in having some sort of data-driven marketing initiative, they're going to say, you know what, I don't know my customer well enough. I need to create the database, and I need to be able to have a reason to communicate with them. So that, I think that hopefully that gives you some insight into that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we're thinking about customer strategy, I think Dutch brought up an interesting question here about having loyalty evolve 2 generations and what that would look like to a customer. So yeah, I'm interested in about customer perception of loyalty programs as they're changing over time. So obviously there's a need for traditional loyalty programs to build up and evolve. And so how do you
Mm-hmm.
manage how a customer perceives that as the system changes over time? How do you keep them engaged when something they're used to is changing into something else? You know, is it a small iteration? What are your thoughts on that?
In terms of if the business itself is changing, or they've got help me with that just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it could be a business itself changing or maybe a shift in strategy or approach for a loyalty program. How do you manage the evolution or change of a loyalty system for the customer?
Mm, yeah, yeah. I think it's probably there are 2 or 3 things. One of them goes back to data. You actually need to watch the data and see how behaviors are changing, and see if visit frequencies are changing or spend levels. You have to watch competition. So I think there's a funny thing about the quote loyalty consulting business. I've always maintained that it's got a very heavy dose of management consulting involved, because one of the first things that we do when we talk to any client is try to figure out how they make money. What's your business model? How does it work? What are the intricacies of it? What's your decision making like inside the company? And then how do you even evaluate financially investment in projects? So we try to approach it from that way, and look at their overall objectives, and kind of plan top down that way from the objectives. And I think one of the things we've always told people is that the very best planning process, while it needs to be supported all along by data work to sort of validate what your recommendations might be, and then you might want to go out and do direct market research to make sure that you're on track with consumers, that they're going to like what you're going to put out there. Because any of us can fall into the trap of having that singular focus group, and getting off track. But once you've done all that, we still really feel like we put a really good stake in the ground to get started. But the key is to stay on top and measure, to have a measurement plan, and just be vigilant about what's happening out in the marketplace. And I think that's how we manage evolution more than
Right.
anything.
And, I want to go back to the focus testing bit. So to get at the root of, I think, Dutch's question, which you clarified a little bit in the chat, which is about, not only
Yeah.
from the business perspective, from the customer perspective, how do you manage their perception of that loyalty program? Is it just with focus testing and, things of that nature? How can you manage that they'll maintain their perception of your system over time as you go through this evolution process?
I think you do something that happens all too rarely in business right now, and that's that you actually talk to them. If I did an email study a couple of years ago, and we looked at about 20 different consumer brands in the main categories where there was good saturation of loyalty programs. So hospitality, airline, retail, banking. And we tracked probably 20,000 emails that were sent to loyalty program members over that period of time. And we found out that it was something like less than 1% were survey oriented. And surprisingly, where you think these companies had loads of data that they'd be working with, there was another very small percent, I think it was 5 or 10% that were behaviorally triggered. So it seems like the offer made was based on something they knew about me or had asked about me. But the shocking thing was they just weren't asking questions. And I, to this date, maybe the listeners, maybe yourself, you can relate to this, but I still get letters from major airlines and hotels that are offering me ski packages and golf packages. And they're both great things to do, but I haven't skied since I left Northeast Ohio 20 some years ago, and I'm not a golfer. And I'm thinking, you know what? All they have to do is ask me, and I'll tell them exactly what I'm interested in, and then hopefully they'll serve up something that makes sense to me. So I think communication is key, and just having a bit more focus on. It's almost a matter of sincerity. You know, I feel like some brands, it's a matter of willpower and sincerity and executing on the promise.
Yeah, it all goes back to the individual person, right? Focusing on the individual person you're trying to go after and really communicating to them and talking to them about their needs and what they want. Yeah, it's true, whose loyalty keychain ever spoke to them and told them how you're feeling today and how can I help you, you know? And so I
Yeah.
would like to go back to your point about, testing about sort of saturated markets. We have a question from Nicola here, in which she wants to ask about the saturation point of loyalty schemes in different organizations and companies right now. So this is
Hmm.
consumer facing, right?
Hmm.
It seems like every big sort
Right.
of company has a type of loyalty program. Are we at a point of
Right.
saturation in the industry? And if so, how do we know if we need one or don't need one as an organization?
You know, I think we're at a saturation of bad programs.
Yeah, yeah.
If you think about it, yeah, there are lots of programs out there. I'm still amazed to go out and see, and there are a couple of segments. If you think about convenience retail and fuel retail, probably casual dining, fast casual, those sort of segments, they're still very much working around email marketing, a little bit of location marketing, but mostly it's discounts, coupons, maybe the occasional contest or something like that. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for growth there. And I think there's an opportunity for those companies to do a generation skipping. So instead of having to go through a process and launch something that looks anything like what the airlines or the hotels have, there's a chance for them to go ahead. And I mean, I've talked to a couple of brands in the casual dining space lately, and I see if somebody made a comment on the stream here, discounts and coupons are very expensive, and more times than not, they're thrown out, they're just sprayed out, so they're not at all targeted. So there are a couple of these brands I've talked to that have said, here's the problem, Bill. As people start to type our name into the Google search bar, before they're finished typing the name of our company, discounts pops out at the end. And so that's how we've trained people to do business with us. How do we change that? And so I think there'll be a big opportunity for growth in some of those segments.
So this is interesting. Something I don't understand quite a bit about loyalty is that we all in this space at least recognize that there's an old generation of loyalty that's existing. That's, earn and burn and all these loyalty cards, they pretty much suck as we understand it as community. So given that this is all data-driven
Mm-hmm.
approach, then why do they still exist? How are these programs surviving? Why do they survive? And why do people keep using them? Is there an actual return that people are seeing with these programs?
Surprisingly, it's I think honestly, a lot of companies, if you held their feet to the fire, couldn't tell you what the return was,
Right.
but they instinctively feel like they need to do something, and they need to do something that's more targeted and has the hope of personalization, even though it's not happening today. So I'll give you an example, just a real local yokel example. I walked into a UPS store where I do business, and they had a belly
Yeah.
platform right there on the counter. I think Belly's great. It's really appropriate for a lot of businesses. But I said, how did you choose Belly? Oh, you know what? We had a new UPS store open within our vicinity. We're a little worried about competition. We had to do something different. We just wanted to do something different. And we didn't want to just throw an ad in the local freely distributed newspaper. And we weren't sure what else to do. So it seemed like a really inexpensive solution that could get people to talk to us and help out. And so they did that. And you know what, in a lot of ways, I could walk in another store in the same strip mall where they just have a stack of punch cards. And I think that it's better at least to have the ability to to get to know people a little bit, have a communication device, and be able to track behavior. You know, the punch cards, as we all know, those I'm not sure why they are around unless it's just a throwaway idea for somebody, just the sole proprietor who says, I am going to give this a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds very similar again to gamification, which is why I think we're in the same family, right? It's sort of the idea of loyalty for loyalty's sake, or gamification for gamification's sake. It's just adding something to try to be different, but in the event, it's just a sort of poorly executed plan on how to get people interested. It just doesn't really work. It's not awesome. But I want to shift gears just a little bit to things that are a little more awesome that I've been thinking about personally. And it's the idea. So I want to go back to context, right? And seeing how data that we know about people helps us sort of engage them. So in terms of things like virtual reality, right? So there's a system called Oculus Rift. Oculus that was recently purchased by Facebook, and there's the Project Morpheus coming out by Sony, and just this idea of um, virtual reality in which people can immerse themselves in environments. I wonder if there is opportunity there to build sort of more, I guess, deeper emotional connections with brands through these things, especially now that we know Facebook owns a VR system. Is there opportunity to make emotional bridges with people in this new sort of medium? Do you see any opportunity in that space?
I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think as long as we don't call it a loyalty program, and as long as we don't call it maybe even a program, but talk about contextual. When people are in online gaming environments or they're in a social network and they're interacting with people, maybe I'm even on active.com and I'm signing up for another 10K or open water swim or something like that. There, there are things that I would value in those environments that would mean something to me, and it's incumbent upon those brands to determine what those things are. And so it's if you want to call that a surprise and delight strategy, it could be. I would call it more of getting to know your customers and finding out what it takes to really build the community and get people excited about being there and being part of it. And maybe the biggest mistake you could make, especially with the generation that's full on engaged in the technology, is to invite them to join a program. There could be like a conqueror's club or something like that, some sort of thing that talks about the achievement or talks about the competition, and maybe that's a way you have to be part of that. It's like being in a tribe or being in a group, and that's maybe how you might have to have some wrapper around it. But I think there are a lot of things you can do and a lot of cool value that you can offer through something like that. And just don't burden it by calling it a program or making people feel like
Yeah.
they have to quote sign up for something.
Yeah. Yeah, that this idea of subtlety, I think it's something we've all heard before as well, is just not being so explicit about what you're doing, and just showing these sort of functions and new things, and just letting people interact and play with it and seeing what happens, rather than just saying, this is this, you do this, and then tell us what I think this is interesting. So, we're coming close to our end here, so I'd love to hear your ideas on how loyalty marketers might approach, subtle gamification or subtle loyalty techniques, and either anything you've seen before or produced. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's right now. I think it's all about expanding your vision. If you look at the whole marketing space as a whole, I mean, I participate in some other forums like Retail Wire, and that's heavily populated by people that are heavily devoted towards merchandising and pricing strategies, and they'll tell you that loyalty programs just don't work. They're extraneous. They cannibalize margin. Um, I go and talk to some of the traditionalists in the business, and no matter what you say to them, there's some elements of the old line loyalty business where their business model is tied to counting points and selling points and redeeming for merchandise. So that tells me that they've got a fundamental business issue that they need to resolve over the next few years, or else they might not even be there in 5 or 10 more years. So for those of us that have freedom to create truly what we consider like the right strategy for the right client, I think it's opening your mind and saying let's build on the traditional disciplines that we know about. Use data, communicate, use the engagement tactics that we know, and build a value proposition that's sustainable over time. But then also grab onto and invoke other techniques like gamification, and work more in the mobile space, look at the location based. I mean, the funny thing is, Ivan, I see much of the innovation in customer marketing and customer data driven marketing coming from the technology world.
Yep.
So it's technology startups like the Bellies and um, Crowd Twist and 500 Friends. It's companies like that that are sort of pushing the business. And so you see the traditional loyalty players kind of sitting there being pushed. And I think the opportunity for, if you want to be that marketer who's really out front, it's just to recognize the lay of the land today and take a step out and say, I'm going to consider, yeah, what I know about loyalty, but I'm going to incorporate some other things to develop solutions for my clients.
Mhm. Well said, Bill. And that's absolutely why I love the tech industry, and that's why we were kind of in it, just to experience all of these things, and all of you are in this lovely community. So, that about wraps up today's gamification revolution. And, thank you, Bill Hanifin, for coming on today. You can see Bill at G Summit this year in San Francisco from June 10th to 13th, and you should check out him as well as a lot of other speakers, including Barry Kirk in the crowd right now. Shout outs to you for coming here. And we'll see you all
Barry,
there at G Summit this year. So please check that out. You can also follow Bill on Twitter at billhanifin.com. So again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Bill, for coming on. And as always, keep having fun. We'll see Gabe next week. Bye, everybody.
thank you.